Hello, Peru. I'm so excited to be here. I asked a couple of people before I came up if you use the word empowerment here in Peru. You do, right? So the reason I named my presentation and the book I'm about to write, Power, Not Empowerment, is because I really hate that word. So I'm going to talk about some words that we use in management that really kind of make me gag. Empowerments. You're empowered. Like I have a magic wand that I can give to you and suddenly you have empowerment. You know why we have to empower people these days? Because we took it all away from them. So I want to talk to you today about some work that I got to do when I was at Netflix. Netflix members, watchers? Latin America was our first foreign territory outside of Canada, which doesn't really count. And I can talk to you forever about, we made every mistake known to humankind going into Latin America. Of course you want to watch Mexican telenovelas, right? No. Okay. So that was a dumb idea. You know, I'll tell you a story. In the early days of Netflix, it was really tough. We were a DVD by mail business in the US, and we had a bunch of VC money, and at one point we ran out. Ran out of money. I had to ask our CEO if we had to make payroll, could he help me cover it? Those were bad days. And during that time, when we almost ran out of money, I laid off a third of the company. We weren't very big, but laying off, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, really, really tough. But we had to really focus, and we had to focus on surviving. And when we got done with that, and we started accomplishing incredible work with a fewer amount of people, I changed the way I think about the job that I had. But the most important change I made was I changed the idea that we're not a family, we're a team. And I stood up on a chair in front of all of our employees and said, we're not your family. Anybody here ever laid off a family member? No, right? It's a different perspective. And so when you start to think about your company as a team of people that come together to win, things change a lot. That's one of my first concepts. The second concept is, when I stood up in that chair and I said, we're a team, not a family, what I wanted to do, my most important critical mission from that point onward, was to make us a great place to be from. And if you think about that in terms of your own career and your own company and what you want to do to create incredibly empowered employees, is people who work on really important stuff that really matters with other people that they think are amazing. So since I left Netflix, I've had an opportunity to talk to a bunch of people who really work on teams, like professional sports coaches. And you guys will get this because you're not Canadian. Okay, I get invited to talk in Montreal in February at the Bell Center. Now, I'm like you. I'm from California. I don't really know about Canada. I don't know what the Bell Center is. And I don't know what the weather's like in Montreal in February. I call my daughter. I'm like, hey, honey, I'm going to Montreal in February. She's like, get a puffy coat. Get it now. Go to Patagonia. Top to bottom, sleeping bag, zip it up, right? So then I look at the weather in Montreal, and in Fahrenheit, it's like minus 22 or something like that, and there's a blizzard coming in, so I get a hotel where I can walk from my hotel underground to the Bell Center where I'm going to be presenting. And while I'm getting ready to do it, I'm going to be on stage with another guy. His name is Scotty Bowman. He's the winningest National Hockey League coach in the history of the game. He's like 70 years old. He's a very sweet man. We're talking about his grandkids and golf. And he says to me, we're under the ice. And then it occurs to me I'm in a hockey stadium. It's a hockey stadium. It's not a nice little tent like this with a bunch of nice people. I walk up on the stage, from the back of the stage, there's spotlights on me. My face is on the Jumbotron. Like, ah. So I'm trying to be really cool, right? I'm very cool. And I sit down in my chair, and everybody claps politely. Scotty Bowman comes up. I'm in the Bell Center in Montreal with the winningest hockey coach in the history of the game. He walks up on stage. People go crazy. I mean, if they had those foam fingers, they would have been waiting. And they're taking like selfies to have him. I mean, there's standing ovation. He hasn't said a word. So I realize now I'm definitely number 2 in this lineup here. So the moderator says, Mr. Bowman, you're the winningest coach in the history of the sport. You've coached all the greats. What's your secret to team success? And he said, you know what? We play an 80-game season, and every 10 games I meet with every player on the team, and they do a self-evaluation. I do an evaluation of them. We look at all their statistics. We look at what our plan is going to be for the next 10 games. We get feedback from the other members of the team. We talk about how well we've gotten to where we're going before, who we're going to play in the next part of the next 10 games, and we put together a plan and we work on it. Moderator says to me, Patty McCord, it's been said that you hate the annual performance review. And I do. And he said, but Patty, what would you do instead of that? And I said what he said. Because if you think about how, so what I want to tell you about is that I got to grow up in Silicon Valley with a bunch of innovators, and Netflix was the most innovative place of all. And so what I did was I changed my mindset about how companies work, right? And if you start to think of yourselves, because you're all employees, and those of you that manage other employees, and say to yourself, self, these are all adults who come to work and want to make a difference. And when you start with that premise, and you start with that premise for yourself, life becomes a little bit different. And if you think about high performance and business metrics as the metrics like when you keep score and you're on a team, and you think about winning, then a lot of that other stuff kind of falls to the side, all that empowerment and engagement and happy stuff, right? Because, if you think about it, if you think about the stuff that you've ever done at work that makes you really proud, like, that you went home and told your partner or your pet, I talk to my pet, like, oh my God, it's an incredible day at work. It was always hard. So we spend a lot of time trying to make each other happy when some of the time the work that we do that matters is hard. And I decided that I was going to try and see if I could eliminate the words policy and procedure from my life. And it wasn't easy, but I had to borrow from the software engineers that I was surrounded by and start talking about discipline and structure instead. I realized that in order to think outside of the box, you kind of have to be in a box. Isn't that crazy? So engineers in particular, anybody here an engineer? Do I have any geeks in the audience? I love geeks. You know why? The world is good or bad, right or wrong, black or white, 0 or 1. And you know what nuance is and subtlety and shades of gray to an engineer? That's bullshit. That's lying, right? So I let go of my HR language and my language of management, and I just started speaking plain English, and I found out that I got there quicker. So instead of thinking about policies that keep people who aren't grown-ups how to operate within the confines of the procedure, you say, I have adults and I want to set them free to be responsible to do really amazing work. And when I left Montreal, I happened to fly from Montreal to Ireland, and I was on the stage with the winningest coach of the Irish games. Do you guys know that Irish people have their own games? And they're weird. They're totally weird. So, it's like high-a-lie with a stick. It's weird. So anyway, he says, I look for people with talent, and I look for them to have drive, and I look for them to know their skills, and I look for spirit. So I look for that too. Okay, so I'm at Netflix. Reed Hastings, CEO, says to the head of product and I, he says, hey, I got a call today. Guess who it's from? We're like, I don't know, the Pope. And he says, no, and this was when Steve Jobs was alive. It was Steve Jobs. And he has a new product, and he wants us to be the first video application on the product. I said, really? What's the product called? And we were to refer to it as the transformational device. It was the iPad, of course. But only 7 people from Netflix were allowed to go to Apple and behold the transformational device. And you know, if you think about it, all we had so far was the rudimentary iPhone, and the idea of that was something that none of us had ever seen. So we didn't know what the technology was, and we didn't know what the time frame was, and it was really hard to build, and so we kind of kludged it together, but we were pretty excited about being the first video product on that Apple device. So we're all crowded around the laptop as Steve Jobs is announcing it at Macworld, you know, and Netflix is, and we're like, well, we're so cool, right? So the next day, next week, I go into the product meeting and do what I do, which is like, oh my God, it is transformational. I mean, I've been in the Silicon Valley my whole life. Touch isn't it amazing? It's primal, right? I was telling him, I'm like, I'm sitting next to this kid last night in the restaurant, and he's 2 years old, and he's streaming SpongeBob on his iPad in an eye chair. He can't read. Okay? So I said, you know, I can't wait until I come home and I swipe my media wall. And, you know, and a movie starts playing, a TV show starts playing, and they start riffing like jazz musicians. One of them goes, oh, no, man, we're not going to make you get up. The other one says, nah, you know what? You'll have your phone, it'll have a moodometer. You put your thumb on it, it'll say, oh, Patty, are you sad? And instantly a romantic comedy starring all of my favorite, you know, right, will start playing. And I looked at them and I thought, they're going to do that someday. I'm in the room with people that could do that could think of something that had never existed before and make it so. And I thought, well, why not me? And so I started thinking about how to transform organizations and have people have really incredibly productive, wonderful lives at work that are about digging deep and finding the talent that they have and matching it. And because I hung around with a bunch of geeks, I created an algorithm. Like the bee guy, right, with the data science. This is Patty's data science, only mine uses words. And my algorithm for success is the key to your success as a manager, and it's absolutely the key to your success as a person going through your career. Find out what you love to do. Sometimes finding out what you love to do means finding out what you hate to do, right? It's just important to find out stuff and go, man, if I never have to do this again as long as I live, I'm okay. That's not one of those things. And find out if what you love to do, that you're extraordinarily good at doing, is something the company needs someone to be great at. And conversely, as management, you know, if somebody seems unhappy or they're frustrated because you're not using them to their fullest potential, it might mean that their fullest potential isn't something you need for this particular project. So if you memorize my algorithm for success, and you think about it when you're really happy at work or when you're kind of frustrated, and figure out what those deltas are, and then have really straight, honest conversations with people. In my book, people keep calling it radical honesty, and I don't, you know, it's funny because I think that's kind of an oxymoron. Why is it radical, to be honest? Why can't we just kind of do that? So what I want you to think about in your organizations is to design for change, not for static, the way it is. We even have a term for the way everybody else does it in HR, for those of you that listen to HR people. It's called best practices. You know what best practices literally translated means? What everybody else does. Reed asked me one time to do a thing for him on stock options in the Silicon Valley, and I'm going through all this complicated stuff about this. And he said, "Who does this, Patty?" And I said, "Oh, everybody, Reed. It's a thorough investigation of best practices in stock options, the entire Silicon Valley." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, you know, HR people kind of copy each other, and Google does it." He said, "Well, what do we do before Google?" I'm like, "Whatever Microsoft did." But it really is like that. So clarity about what your organization is trying to accomplish, your team is trying to accomplish, what you're trying to accomplish, the better you can get at that, the more rapidly you can articulate the context around what you're doing, the customers you're serving. You know what I love about working these days is that we can all be so selfless. Right? We come to work to serve the customers. You know, I used to tell people in my team, we're a service organization. It's not spelled S-E-R-V-A-N-T-S. I don't know what the Spanish word is, but you know, we serve the people at Netflix. At Netflix, we were a business that only grew through word of mouth. You only told somebody else to try it for free if you loved it. So our job was relentlessly to make the product better. And so when you're in an organization where your job is to make your customers happy, number one, first of all, then all the other stuff kind of falls to the side and you learn how to be straighter with each other. And then the other thing I think that's really difficult to successful companies is to work within the bounds of reality. You know, with startups, they often use the horizon of someday. The sentences usually go like this: "We'll be awesome someday." That's a little too broad for me, right? You want clarity about where you're going, about what you're going to do, and what time frame that you're going to do it. And I think that the most important critical skill that you need to build in for you as an employee and for you as a manager in your organization is judgment. People who make good calls can do amazing work. So with that, I think that it's our work, all of our work, to figure out how to transform. I mean, you talked about it, a lot of stuff here today, about the digital revolution, about the way we all exist in the world that isn't the same as it was even 10 years ago. So if I were the queen of the forest, I would walk into a company and say, "Hey, guess what? All bets are off, everything changed." And the entire company would say, "Yes." Trying something new, starting something new. And when I think about innovation, the way I understand innovation, you know, what I want you to talk about is the business that you're in. Try and avoid that special language. Try and avoid those cliched words unless you absolutely can articulate what they mean. I think that the metrics of our business are enough. I really don't think that there's a lot of value in measuring engagement if your company's not delivering to your customers what you need. It is true that engaged employees do better work, but it's not true that engaged employees make better products necessarily. And then question what's best practices and fix the stuff you own in your own organization. Be advocates for change within the world that you operate in. And then most importantly, what I want to leave you with, my biggest message to the world is, just because we've always done it, and I know you know this, doesn't mean we have to keep doing it. We can choose to keep doing things the way that we've always done them in terms of how we manage people, but I just want us to ask why. Looping back to my story with Scotty Bowman, right? If you say, "Hey, I think that giving people feedback on their performance is a really good idea," and you were innovating on that, you were starting with that as the thing that you were trying to do, it's highly unlikely you would do it once a year. Just saying, right? So question everything that you do, all the policies that you have, all the ways that you operate, and then choose to keep doing it that way if that's the way that works for you. And if not, I want you to consider throwing it away. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the presentation. It was great.
Thanks.
Ahora quería presentar a Luis Felipe Castellanos, CEO de Interbank, para que pueda hacer la entrevista.
Okay. She's going to move the chair so I don't have to sit sideways.
Gracias. Okay, well, Patty, thanks very much. Really
Very
inspiring. It's I have many questions. So many questions that I don't know where to start. Let's first start at Netflix,
Yeah.
company that transformed itself from DVDs distribution, where I was one of the original subscribers,
Uh-huh.
to streaming. How did you really do it? How can a company really transform itself so
Dude,
fast?
It's not so fast. You know, it's so fast in retrospect. Has anybody read the Netflix culture deck? If you have, it took us 15 years to write it. Right? And most people just throw it, give it to me and go, we want to do this. I'm like, well, let's get started. It's actually having a vision, you know, having that 6 months out, a year out, what will be occurring that's going to make us amazing. It's starting with amazing, not starting with better, right? If we had the most amazing, I'll give you an example. When we started streaming, it wasn't really technically possible. Do you guys remember the Real Player? For those of you who are like older techie people, right? Was that little? That's what we started streaming with, right? You couldn't hear it, you couldn't see it, and then, for example, when we first started streaming, we did it on a laptop. That was our first player, and we tested 5 versions of the laptop player, right? One of them looked like the cockpit of a submarine. Like the engineer said to me, they're like, I think customers are really going to like this. I'm like, no, they're going to hate it. What the hell is this little thing over here? Well, Patty, that's their buffering speed. I'm like, buffering speed? I don't even ever want to know what that means. And you guys know what people think the internet is. They're like, what? What do you think? I'm like, normal people think the internet is magic. And I don't want to wait for it to buffer. I just want it to play. And that probably took 3 years. So it's a matter of, it is not, so it seems, Netflix is 20 years old. So it's a long time, but it's that relentless, never settling for less, that relentless focus on the customer and on greatness for the customer.
Great. Now, we here in the group run like we work in different companies, different industries, but we do think we have like a vision, like we need to transform, digital is the future and whatnot. No? And I was listening to your TED Talk, and you mentioned it today, something about like get rid of processes, get rid of compliance. I run a bank.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're all about compliance, and we're about processes, and we are all about the money of our customers.
Yep.
What do I do?
You got to really be careful with that stuff. I mean, people's money is really important. You know, my lawyer friend here, here's the deal with laws. They're usually written to protect you. Right? So labor law in particular is written to protect people from employers who are going to exploit them. So don't exploit them. That's a good start, right? And then, you know, if you're going to start getting rid of policies, you have to think about what you would do instead. So there has to be a give and take. So for example, I confronted our CFO at one point about travel and expense policies. And he really wanted to have, and you probably do this because every company in the world does, I am not putting you down, you probably wanted to have finance approval on expenditures over X amount of money, right? It makes perfect sense. We all do it. We all have its best practices. But I am a company full of engineers. And if I've got an engineer that goes to somebody in finance to approve any expense over $5,000, you can bet those engineers know that 5,001 is more than 5,000. That really doesn't add any value at all. And they resent the hell out of having to go talk to somebody that doesn't know what they're spending the money on. So I had to, over time, transform the people in the finance organization whose job it was to say no to be people who sat in the organizations of the teams that they supported and gave them constant feedback about what was occurring. So they could say, hey, by the way, our average per person spending is trending at $6,000 and we budgeted for $5,000. So how do we think about that? What's changing in the organization? How do we do it? So you have to redefine people's jobs in some ways, but you have to, but it's just that little bit, the other thing was, when I got rid of keeping track of paid time off, I stand on a chair a lot. So I stood on the chair and I said, okay, I'm going to try this great experiment. And if what our lawyers say and everybody else says will happen and you guys are all going to sue me, we won't do it. But if it turns out to be a really dumb idea, I'll just go back to the way we've always done it, like you do in any other part of the business. So you can try something.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe sometimes you feel it's like two words colliding, no? That's.
Well, I think it's really reasonable to be not take risks with other people's money. I mean, that makes sense to me. That's why we have regulatory environments, right? It's just that we don't have to take the same amount of risk with how we treat each other.
Now, during this transformation process, what we are finding is there's like the cool stuff that people, like some people in the organization are doing, and there's like the stuff what we've been doing for 100 years. So there's a disconnect between people that are really excited on like the new projects and then the people that are running like the business as usual, if you want to call it, no? What can we do to make everybody feel part of building a future together?
Well, partly you take a couple of business as usual processes and throw them out, and that usually scares the hell out of them, and that wakes people up. I don't think anybody wants to come to work and not feel like they're doing something that matters. I really don't. I mean, people think I'm a Pollyanna about that. I'm too optimistic about that, but it's not true. I mean, I think everybody wants to feel pride in what they do. And so the people that are just coming in, putting in the time, are you sure you want them to be part of your team or not? And maybe they're doing that because that's what they need to do at some point in their life. The other thing is, it's three-dimensional work is, right? There's the stuff that you do at work because it needs to get done, then there's the lifestyle that you have, and then there's the ambition you have at certain points in your life. I mean, it's complex. And for some people, for sometimes, they just want to go and clock in. And if that works for your organization where you're at, great. And if it doesn't, then don't have those guys. I mean, my belief is that your careers are that's your life, right? So be thoughtful about if you're sitting around really frustrated because you're not doing what you love to do and nobody's noticed, note to self, they may not. And if they don't, then, take charge of your career. It's your life. Live it. You're going to work a long time.
Yes. Okay, in terms of people, again, we are like 60,000 people at Intercorp. We probably hire around 8,000 people per year. Rotation is high.
Yeah.
Millennials, they like to go from company to company. How do we do to retain them?
Okay, so I'm not a fan of the word millennial either. You were a millennial, I was a millennial. It was a while back.
I am a millennial.
Here's what millennial means early in your career, right? You're getting started and you're just figuring things out. And you usually have a lot of mobility and you don't have a lot that's tying you down. What do you want when you're a millennial? Everything. When do you want it? Now. Any other questions? My son just turned 30. He got engaged. I said, so what are you, a thirlineal? Do I have to make him a new word for you? And by the way, he wants different stuff now that he's getting married and it's different, right? So if I think about Netflix for me, I realized that I'm a serial entrepreneur. That's where I really like it. And at Netflix, I was there 14 years because I got 3 companies. So there's a lot of ways to think about moving around and staying. I think it's perfectly okay to have people stay in companies for a really long time, as long as they're engaged in doing great work. I think that's wonderful. But you shouldn't exist just so they'll stay, right? And you shouldn't stay just because you think the company's promised to keep you. That's just, it's not true. I got interviewed by a guy from The Guardian the other day. It's a British paper. Patty McCord, what do you think about, this idea that you have of companies operating differently? It's so refreshing. When did you start to see the fact that companies couldn't promise you work for the rest of your life? I'm like, I don't know, since I started working in the early 80s, 70s, I don't know. And he goes, yes, I've noticed it too, but it's much later. And I said, well, when did you start to notice this? He goes, oh, it's had to have at least been the mid-80s. I'm like, dude, it's 2017. I mean, it hasn't been like that for a long time, so I think we just face reality about that.
Okay, now, getting back to power, not
Power.
empowerment.
Yes.
Okay, power. Netflix is a great company, and we've learned it firsthand. We have some trouble at Interbank with Wi-Fi connection. It's not that fast, so we did some investments to increase the band and all that. And we bought a tool to see what was the app that was being used the most. Our big surprise was that it was Netflix, actually, at work.
What are you guys doing? 60,000 people
So-
watching Netflix?
It's all about autonomy for these teams. It's all about
I'm going to
power.
tell them at Netflix, hey, by the way, in Peru, they're all watching all the time.
So no, autonomy, power, no, guys, go do, conquer the world, and then you're watching Netflix at work. Like, what's going on?
Oh, really good shows. I guess you can't stop watching them. I remember when people started getting the internet on their laptops. I would go to these conferences, and HR people would just fret about how we've got to stop our employees from doing this useless bullshit on the internet. And we were all web surfing. We were trying to figure out what was up, right? And now our worlds are completely social and connected. We should embrace this and make the most of it.
Okay.
Maybe you should only watch movies about high productivity workplaces.
Okay. One more question.
Okay.
Two more questions, actually. This is fascinating, actually.
For a banker, you'd think he'd know one or two, but
Yeah. No. Customers.
yes, customers.
In this digital transformation, because we can talk about the organization, whatever, we feel in Peru, sometimes the customers are not ready for this digital jump. How can we know what's the right time?
One of the things we did at Netflix was we were very scientific. It's partly, and that's something that I sort of thought everybody did, but I'm now realized they didn't. We did a lot of A/B testing. So we would take a new idea and we'd try it on some customers and try it on the others and see what stuck. So that whole, which is also my methodology for the work that I did. It's like, try it. If it doesn't work out, then we'll try something else. That's what innovators do. When you're creating something new, the biggest success you have is usually failure. We're getting into that. Okay. It's just you.
Yeah. Don't worry.
Okay. So try stuff is what I'd say. You don't know. I mean, figure it out. Try it with some people. Try it with others. And then some customers you just have to bring along. Netflix still has a very, very healthy DVD by mail business in the U.S.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my mom has. It's just great, honey. It's got all the good movies on it, and it's so much easier than to push that button.
Okay, we need to finish, but I want to ask one more. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Patty, in your words, really simple. I think this will sum up everything that you've said. What makes people happy at work?
Accomplishing amazing things with other great colleagues that matter to, because I just was at Washington, D.C. yesterday with the World Bank, people from the World Bank, and they were just kind of fussing about, getting rid of process. And I'm like, you guys have a mission to conquer poverty in the world? I'm thinking you want to do that as fast as you can. Well, let's not let bureaucracy get in the way of doing something that important. So you can do it. You all have the power.
Great. Well, thanks very much. I think now we open it to
Questions?
questions from our public.
Thank you.
Preguntas, levanten la mano y se van a acercar con un micrófono.
Come on, ask me something. There's one.
Hi.
The back.
I'm on this side. What was the best career advice you ever got?
I don't know. Well, yeah, actually do know. When I was in my 20s, I worked for a very large corporation, and we did this thing where you wrote down what you did every hour of the day, and then you wrote down all the things you thought were important to do, and then you took the two lists and you compared them to each other and you prioritized them, and then you went to this offsite and your manager had done the same thing in secret, and everybody else was opening up their envelopes, you know, and my manager's envelope said, talk, talk, talk. And mine was full of like, I need to be more organized, you know, I need to learn how to operate spreadsheets better. And he's like, you know, really, honestly, you never need to do that stuff because you suck at it. And so so over time, when I started running teams, the very first person I always hired was the person who was completely opposite of me. Right? It's somebody really detail-oriented, introverted, heads down, got the work done, never skipped anything because I'm all up here all the time. So, but I can't get anything done without that yin to my yang. So I guess that's the best advice I got.
I can work for you.
Uh-huh.
I can work for you then.
Yeah, we'll be a good team.
Here we have the other question. Here.
Hi, Patty. Well, first of all, thank you very much for sharing with us.
You're welcome.
I would like to know if you can share with us the top 3 best practices for empowerment the teams in an innovation process. Thank you.
The 3 best practices for empowerment in teams. When someone is complaining, either a colleague or a subordinate or somebody else on the team is complaining, you want to say, what leads you to believe that's true? Right? Management doesn't know what they're talking about. They made a really stupid decision. Really, why do you think that? Second, more important question is, if you were in management, what data would you want to have to make that decision? Okay? The second one is to speak up. You know, you can't be heard if you don't open your mouth. So that frustration of walking out of a meeting and thinking, nobody asked me my opinion, that's going to last a really long time, and you can speak up and you won't die and nothing terrible will happen. And the third one is related to that, which is if you're in a leadership position and you want people to behave differently, then look closely in the mirror. You can't be what you can't see. And I talk to a lot of companies who write these really beautiful PowerPoint decks now. Okay, CEO at a little startup I'm talking to the other day. I said, so what kind of company do you want to have? He said, I'm an engineer. I want a company that's really efficient, really technically capable, really effective. And I said, okay, well, I've noticed that here in your startup, there's 4 pool tables. And I'm thinking you could put a whole bunch of engineers where the pool tables are, but that's just me. And I said, so what if you and I were playing pool and I'm about to kick your butt and I've never done it before and everybody's watching, what would happen? Oh, by the way, it's 10 to 2 and the staff meeting's at 2. He said, well, you know, everybody would watch until I finally beat you. And I'm like, really? You want efficiency? Be on time. Right? It's the little things. It's the little things that you guys know that you see every day. It's not what you say, it's what you do. Be the person you want your colleagues to be.
¿Más preguntas? Por ahí hay una.
Hello, Patty.
Hi.
Rudy from Interbank. Imagine you have a team fully of the best engineers, software engineers, but they are great individually. And when you put them to work together, they don't know how to work together because they believe in their own ways to do things.
Yes.
What is your advice?
I usually tell them to knock it off. I mean, really, the software engineer is God stuff. It's really boring, right? I think the best way to prove that is to prove that, right? I mean, if you manage teams of software engineers, you know when the magic happens, when they really do collaborate and cooperate, it's way better than the sum of its parts. So, I mean, I think it's where honestly, my advice would be just bury them in work. So they don't have time to gripe about it. It's like, oh, really? Too bad. I just, here's how I get adult behavior from people. You just insist on it. And you call people out. Like, did that seem like something a grown-up would say? No, so don't say that anymore. You can be straightforward. They're not God. They're just software engineers. And the other thing is, because software engineers spend an awful lot of time in front of the screen, they're not particularly adept at having conversations with people. So sometimes you have to teach them how to do it. So here's a good tip, 2 tips for you. When they come to you and whine about the other people, then first you say, wow, what'd they say when you told them that? And then the person will say, oh, I can't possibly tell them that. I'm like, but you just told me. So I can help you find the words on how to have a conversation with them. But if you can have a conversation with me, you can have a conversation with them. Some of it's teaching people those skills.
More questions?
In the front row.
Thank you. Hi, Patty. Quick question. In regard to the manifesto that become very famous, what do you think made it so noteworthy? How is it still relevant? And how did you piece it together over, we're finding out, 15 years now?
Yeah.
Was it informed by what you observed, or did it actually flow the other way? You kind of dictated
It was both. It was both. And so so you've read it, so you know about the part about high performance, right? I couldn't, high performance for us was people who were adults who had good judgment. And it probably took 4 years to purge out the people who weren't, right? Because you put up with a lot with people, and then you get really better at interviewing them, right? You get better at not hiring the people who are going to be immature, right? That's one thing. And the second thing is we did it collaboratively. So Reed and I didn't write the document. We usually would write the first draft, and then we'd run it through our entire management team. So the first chapter, which is the values part, we rewrote that 6 times. So here's a true story of that document. It's ugly PowerPoint document, right? We used it as an internal onboarding document. So whenever 10 people were hired, Reed and I would sit in a room, we'd go over it with them. So he and I are driving to work in the car one day, and he says, hey, I met this woman last night. She has this really cool company. It's called SlideShare. And I'm like, oh, okay, what do they do? And he goes, well, they allow you to put PowerPoint slides on the internet. I'm like, that's a cool idea. I wonder what somebody's going to put out. He's like, I put the deck out last night. I'm like, what? And he said, what are you worried about? I'm like, first of all, it's the ugliest document known to humankind. I mean, I don't even think for those of you who are designers, it's like got these little arrows and this, it's just horrible. And second of all, I said, you're going to scare all our candidates, Reed. And he said, only the ones we don't want. But it changed interviewing the very next day. And why I think it's so compelling to people is not because it's radical, it's just logical. That's all it is. I mean, it's just straightforward. Like, if you thought about this logically, then this might make sense. So that's why it's so appealing, I think, to people. It's in plain English, right? It doesn't have manifesto words to it. It was not written as a manifesto. Anything else? Yeah.
Hey, my question is, how to make a Netflix service to be sustainable a long time. It's like I think it's very easy to copy a service like to put movies in a server. However, Netflix is like a love mark. Like I don't know if it's considered a love mark or a service that has differentiation in itself. So how to make it sustainable and not...
Never done. Never, ever, ever, ever done. The company that's Netflix, I left 6 years ago, and Netflix is now an original content international company. And it was not 5 years ago when I left, right? It was mostly in the US, and it was mostly content that we bought from other people. The answer, the Netflix answer, because I know them so well, is it's never, ever good enough. Never good. What if it was better? What if it was the content was better? The other thing that's hard to copy is the deep, for those of you who are data people, Netflix has 20 years of data about how people consume entertainment. And it's really, really, really helpful because no matter where you are in the world, I mean, you guys all raise your hands, you're Netflix customers. You know, we humans love a good story. So I'll leave you with this. One of the reasons I joined, even though I thought it was the dumbest idea I ever heard in my life when it was DVD by mail, was I'm kind of an independent movie buff, and I thought, someday, someday if we were successful, then people would see there's better content, there's better entertainment out there besides what Hollywood says is the latest blockbuster. So I wanted to be part of the little story being told. And one of the beautiful things about Netflix International is that stories are told all over the world now, and they're consumed all over the world. So that's an exciting place to be because we're just humans. We love sitting around telling stories. And the other one I'll leave you with is your culture, your company culture, is the same as any other culture. I'm very anthropological about it. It's the stories you tell. It's the behaviors you reward. It's who you look up to, right? And so that's why I'm, say, if you're in leadership in this organization, be the company you want to be. And then if you are someone aspiring to be a leader in this organization, then be the leader you want to be and it'll happen for you.
Great. Well, I guess we have time for one more.
We have one more question.
Last question.
Yeah.
Better be good.
Better be good?
Yeah. I've been practicing. So yeah, I was wondering, what do you like the most about what you're doing now, and why?
Well, partly meeting all of you. I get to travel all over the world, and it's pretty darn swell. And I was just saying today, what I love about traveling to a new city like Lima is now I have all these friends, right? So I could say, where's the best ice cream? Or, what should I avoid when I go to Machu Picchu, right? And so I really love that part. And I think and I didn't want to do this. I told my staff, look, if I ever become one of those people standing on stage, just kill me. They all have offered to. It's amazing to me that across industry and across the world, we're all kind of in this boat where we know that the way we've always done things at work just doesn't feel right anymore. It feels too constraining. It feels too slow. Right? It just moves too slow, and those of us that live in the real world with we're online all the time. It's like we know we have to create those products for our customers of the future because they're gonna. Of course, they should demand it, right? So, what I find is that people know it's not good, but they don't know how, and so that's my message: is I'm going out in the world. Go, just try. Just don't accept it. You wouldn't with any other part of your business. Just treat the way you're managing people like you would a product or a bank or a service right? You would question it, you'd make it better, you'd work on it, you'd think about it. So that's it. And I'm liking it a lot. Thank you very much.
So it was a good question.
It was a great question.
Thank you very much.